Welcome back. We are here with our good friend, world-leading neurologist, teacher, New York Times bestseller, Dr. David Perlmutter. David, you know, it's just such a joy to spend time with you. We've been talking a lot about things that hurt the brain, things that we ingest. But, you know, I think probably one of the most exciting things in my life as a psychiatrist and a neuroscientist, and what we learn from doing brain SPECT imaging, is you're not stuck with the brain you have. You can make it better. And we've been able to prove it with, you know, I mean, literally thousands of before and after scans. Yes, there are things you can do today that hurt your brain. Drugs, alcohol. We just published a new study on marijuana, head trauma, sleep apnea. But there are also lots of things you can do to help your brain. Talk to us your experience with neurogenesis and actually growing the brain.
Well, I will, and let me just say that, as you well pointed out, early on in our days, this was not felt to happen. We were told we were given a certain number of brain cells, and that was it. About age 18, we were on the skids after that, and you know, every time you drank a beer, you'd kill off 30,000 brain cells or some number. I can't remember what the number was now for whatever reason. But that said, what a notion that we can engage in stem cell therapy, that our bodies are involved in stem cell therapy right now. Everybody's talking about, let's have stem cell therapy for this and that. Well, it's happening in everyone's body right now, in their brain of all places, and most importantly, in the brain's memory center, the hippocampus. Wow. So what can you do to amplify that process is certainly what everyone is wanting to know right now. And I think that that's a very important concept, because we can amplify the process of neurogenesis, of growing new brain cells, in the brain's memory center, and this has been associated with a reduction in the risk of Alzheimer's disease. It's a lot to take in. So I think by far and away, the most important supplement that you can add to your regimen to help grow new brain cells is a supplement called aerobic exercise, which
love that.
Buy a pair of sneakers. And it turns out that this is a powerful, what we call epigenetic event, meaning it changes the gene expression in a person's body to create a particular chemical called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. BDNF is what regulates the growth of new brain cells. It regulates what is called synaptic plasticity. That's a technical term which means how one nerve cell talks to the next nerve cell, which is obviously fundamental as it relates to learning. It also regulates the ability of neurons to withstand trauma. Those individuals with higher levels of BDNF, when they are exposed to a particular type of trauma, their brains are more resilient. Now, the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2014 published a really important study that demonstrated a very strong correlation between lower levels of BDNF and higher levels of becoming demented, and as you might expect. So we really need to do everything we can to amp up our growth of new brain cells by increasing BDNF, and we can do it. You can do it starting today. And this is, in my opinion, a powerful way to reduce a person's risk for Alzheimer's. And by far and away, the most important way of bumping up BDNF, enhancing the growth of new brain cells, is aerobic exercise. But we know that other important things that we can choose to do will also amplify the body's production of BDNF. For example, the nutritional supplement, DHA, which is also found as a part of the food we eat, as in eating grass-fed beef or wild fish, is a powerful upregulator of BDNF. The spice turmeric will do it as well. Whole coffee fruit extract does it. And then new research, very exciting, we're seeing that even dietary fiber, by changing the gut bacteria, will also augment the growth of the increase in BDNF and therefore enhance the growth of new brain cells. So Study after study is now revealing that when we increase this BDNF, increase the growth of new brain cells, it makes the brain more resistant to decline. And it also now has been demonstrated to actually improve and increase the size of the brain's memory center called the hippocampus. A study that was performed at the University of Pittsburgh, published by Dr. Kirk Erickson, demonstrated that in individuals followed over a 2-year period of time, those individuals who were sedentary demonstrated on a special MRI scan a hippocampus, the part of the brain that deals with memory, getting smaller, as you would expect. But those who engaged in 20 minutes of aerobics each day, is all I'm asking, their hippocampus actually grew as opposed to declining in size. Their memory function improved, and their blood BDNF levels increased. What are you waiting for? That's why we're telling people you've got to get aerobic exercise every day. When people ask me what they can do so they don't end up like mom or dad, I say, step one, you gotta exercise. And that's not proprietary. Nobody owns that. We're not pitching a product here. You gotta get out and get some aerobics. So, hey, my dad, I've mentioned this before, he passed away, a brilliant brain surgeon. He passed away from Alzheimer's. And as rough as that was, it helped solidify me in terms of getting out there and getting this message out that is the path he went down. That doesn't have to be your path. Mm-hmm. The risk of Alzheimer's, if you live to be age 85, is a flip of a coin. It's 50-50. Let's do whatever we can to change those odds. And let me just mention one more thing about this neurogenesis. We now understand that neurogenesis is a fundamental player in mood regulation as well. That when there's decreased BDNF, it correlates with depression. And that we need to think about that in terms of why is exercise helpful for
I was
depression?
just thinking that.
Because it regenerates the hippocampus. So we also know, and this isn't a pitch for the SSRI drugs because I'm not pitching them, but we do know that SSRI drugs are somewhat helpful, if not minimally helpful for depression. And one of the things that they do as well is they also augment the growth of new brain cells in the brain's memory center. So the hippocampus is fundamental for memory, but also fundamental for mood. So everything I mentioned, the turmeric, the DHA, the whole coffee fruit extract, and certainly exercise, all are relevant as it relates to mood regulation as well, not just declining memory function.
So I know a lot of people, we try to get them to exercise as well. And I know when I was a kid, I figured out I didn't feel right without exercise. I just never felt right. And to this day, if I don't exercise, I mean, it's like a thing with us. He's like, you need to get out of the house and exercise because it makes me feel sad and grumpy and not right. And I mean, I didn't know about the BDNF part. I knew about all of the endorphins and, the serotonin and all that stuff. I didn't realize the BDNF piece of that. So that's really important to know.
I would simply Google exercise and BDNF or exercise and neurogenesis. The other important thing about exercise that we've just learned is that it increases or is associated with increased diversity of the gut bacteria, as we've talked about before. That's really something that you want to do. So
there's really no good reason not to exercise. It's the most powerful drug we have in every area.
People say, well, I'm not going to be able to go out and run 4 miles a day. And I'm not asking that. I'm saying if you can only walk from your living room to the mailbox.
Yep.
See,
I have a treadmill
20
desk.
minutes.
I have a treadmill desk because this is so important for me that if I have to sit at my computer for too long, I get really irritable. So I have a treadmill desk when I'm answering emails or whatever. I'm just moving at least moving. My exercise routine is separate, but at least I'm not sitting still.
So I want to push on coffee a little bit because it's the number one, after sugar, I suppose, it's the number one drug Americans use. The reason I get concerned about it, besides the fact that people put awful things in it, artificial sweeteners and dairy products that have things in it that you can't pronounce, is early on when I first started doing SPECT, there were a number of studies that showed caffeine constricted blood flow. up to 30%. And so the process we have at Amen Clinics is the morning you're going to have your SPECT scan, we don't want you to have caffeine. And so, I always tell my patients, if you have a cup or two a day, it's not a problem. And there's research that shows it may help with things like diabetes and Parkinson's disease. But there's all sorts of other things you can do to help diabetes
So I have to
and
admit,
Parkinson's.
I like coffee, and I was really
disease.
happy when I heard that it had kahewal in it, and it was got all these benefits. I try not to drink too much because of the blood flow issue, but
given that Starbucks is everywhere, and we are, as a society, sleep deprived. So on average, we got 9 hours of sleep in 1900, and now we get 6 hours and 43 minutes on average. That people are using coffee as a way to manage their tiredness. So I have these ideas competing
Right.
in my head. Talk to us about how you think about it.
Well, like every decision, you're going to weigh the pros and cons until you make that decision. And let me just say, when I had breakfast with you in California a couple of months ago, I noticed that you had herbal tea and while I had my coffee. So I know where you stand on that. And again, like everything, there are upsides and downsides. And I think the blood flow issue is interesting. Those studies, I think, were both laboratory animals, and there are some human evidence that it happens in us as well. Pretty whopping dosages of caffeine, though. I mean, I know it can happen at low levels, but I think the typical 35 milligrams that you might get in an espresso, and people need to realize the espresso actually has less caffeine than drip coffee, is probably not going to me. I mean, this is self-serving because I drink coffee, but I don't think it's a big issue. I think the upsides of coffee stem first from its role in regulating a pathway in the body called the NRF2 pathway. Right. It is on the top of the list, ahead of turmeric, ahead of rosemary, ahead of green tea
I heard
extract.
this too. I was happy.
Powerful pathway that amplifies the production of antioxidants, that reduces the activation of something called NF-kappa beta, which means it reduces inflammation, and happens to bump up the production of glutathione peroxidase, so reduces the formation of peroxide and helps with detoxification as well. So we really want to do what we can to amplify the NRF2 pathway, and coffee does that. It also contains polyphenols, which are antioxidants in and of themselves, but also are nurturing for our gut bacteria. But your point is well taken. Any colored packet that you would put in your coffee is devastating, whether it's pink, blue, or white. The new research demonstrates that these artificial sweeteners are devastating towards the gut bacteria, and people think that they're doing the right thing because they're not using sugar. And your other point about what is in, typical the creamer that you get at the restaurant, who knows what's in that? But I think, like anything else, there are two sides to the issue.
So I want to offer a tip here because I actually have several coffee drinks in the new cookbook for this reason. I try to watch the caffeine intake. So I actually get a 70%, it's 70% lower acid, organic, half-calf coffee, which I brew and put some coconut oil or something like that in it to minimize those effects. But it's very tasty, and I get less caffeine but still get those benefits because I heard all of those statistics that you talked about. And I want those benefits. I like the idea of something comforting in the morning, but I don't want the effects of too much caffeine either. So
let's take another
I'm
minute.
with you. And I'll be the first to admit that I find caffeine to be a mood lifter.
Right.
I am...
Especially if you have ADD like I do.
I feel better after my coffee. My wife and I have a cup every morning, and then we do a reading or two together with our coffee. And it's... it's a habit, but I like it. I just think it's a great way to start the day.
Right.
Well, it's absolutely a mood elevator. And it will no matter when you do it. My concern is if you do it on a regular basis, you will then need to do it. And that leads me to the last thing I want to push on a little bit, which is alcohol, because many people drink it thinking it's a health food. And based on my experience with SPECT, it's not a health food. It decreases globally perfusion in the brain. And then what I didn't know until last year, it actually increases the risk of 7 different kinds of cancer. So the idea that it's a health food, but like coffee, it has polyphenols in it, and there's studies that basically say moderate drinking is associated with less heart disease.
But doesn't alcohol also kill gut bacteria?
Well, so that's interesting because, Tana's a nurse, and it's like, why does the nurse put an alcohol swab on your arm before she gives you a shot? It's to kill bacteria. And so I would love your thoughts on that for our audience.
I think that by and large, we get back to a description of quality and quantity. And, as I mentioned before, studies, for example, that say we shouldn't eat meat don't take into account the difference between grass-fed, organically raised meat and what you might typically find. There's a big difference in a study of alcohol consumption based upon the fact that this person was either drinking a couple shots of Jack Daniels or had a glass of Merlot. Those are not comparable. There are too many variables here that need to be taken into consideration. So a study saying, we looked at alcohol consumption, and in that study, we included scotch, gin, vodka, and red wine, and we came to the following conclusion. So I think by and large, hard liquor has no redeeming value. I think that there are very powerful redeeming values in red wine to a degree that could be exceeded when you go to the other side of the bell curve. In other words, a glass of wine for men, 1 to 2 for men and or 1 glass for women, seems, as you mentioned, to be associated with reduced risk of Alzheimer's and cardiovascular disease. That means that there might be some upsides that may be purely emotional, but maybe biochemical as well, and maybe relates to certain things like resveratrol and the polyphenols that are contained in that glass of wine. But again, this is a bell-shaped curve because on the left side of that curve, when you're not drinking alcohol, your risk is increased. And certainly on the right side of that curve, when you're drinking more than your 2 or 3 or 4 glasses now, you're in trouble because you've raised this to a level that it becomes threatening. And whether that's because the alcohol is damaging the bacteria, which we know it does, when we override our compensatory ability to deal with alcohol, because we can break it down significantly, but if it's too much and kills bacteria, then that may set us up for problems. And, it's important to understand there's been alcohol in the human diet for a long, long time as a byproduct of the fermentation process that occurs even in nature. Even before we actually actively fermented fruit to make beverages. So we have mechanisms to deal with alcohol. But like anything else, I think we have to be so selective in terms of what is it we are talking about here. Are we talking about red wine from a vineyard in California where they've sprayed the vineyard with glyphosate and other issues that are threatening? Or is this an organic red wine that we're going to have 1 glass or 2 glasses a day of? So again, like the coffee, I think, you can argue both sides of the equation. I don't drink enough red wine. I think I should probably drink more. But the problem is, because I generally do, I stay academically involved until the evening time. So I can't, once I've had a glass of wine,
it's done,
my day is over because I would never think about going and writing papers and doing research once I've had that glass of wine because it's time to turn it all off. And probably that's actually a good thing. So.
Right. So we tell people a couple, glasses of wine a week is not going to harm you for the reasons you just said. Your body has the ability to detoxify and it's not going to be that threatening. But for people who are drinking, like you said, more than a certain amount, that's where their risk is increased. So.
And again, it's about balance. I mean, truthfully, I think watching the evening news now is
I agree. We agree.
Brain and bad for your body. I mean, you can only imagine what your cortisol level is doing when you're right now watching what's on the evening news. People are going to do it because they, on the other hand, want to be informed so that they can make decisions. So, it's weighing whether you should do it or not.
Agree.
So many interesting things.
So
We are
wonderful.
so grateful for your
So
time.
Dr.
and your
David Perlmutter.com.
I'm just delighted to chat with you guys.
Oh, it's wonderful. I just want to make sure they know.
drperlmutter.com.
Oh, drperlmutter.com.
So he is the author of Grain Brain, massive bestseller, along with Brain Maker, the Grain Brain Cookbook, the new book, the Grain Brain Whole Life Plan. He has been a star on public television, and I think one of the most important things he does is he teaches physicians how to have a completely new look at optimizing and healing their patients. Thank you, my friend.
So much fun.
Oh, thank you guys for having me. I sure appreciate it.